Today, the lecture will be on world systems theory and dependency theory. Immanuel Wallenstein is the name very much associated with world system theory. The whole world economy has been divided into three zones: core, periphery, and semi-periphery. The core countries are the most developed countries. The periphery countries are the very poor countries, and semi-periphery countries are in between the core and the periphery countries. Now, this theory of world systems was derived from the intellectual heritage found in the critique of developmental perspective of liberal political economy. The framework of world systems theory is very simple and elementary. Specific events in the world system are explained in terms of the demands of the system as a whole. Actors are playing their role not due to their national interests, but because the system wants them to act in that particular manner. The central theme of world systems theory is the proposition that the core regions are exploiting the peripheral regions through various mechanisms of unequal exchange. Superficially, this idea of unequal exchange seems similar to the focus of the structuralists on unequal economic transactions. World systems conceptualization is an effort to ground the unequal exchange in a labor theory of value. Now, this labor theory of value forms the basis of an attempt to explain how surplus value is extracted from the working class of the periphery and shifted to the core. The transfer of value from one region of the world to another region of the world capitalist economy leads to primary accumulation of wealth, and which also lead to maintenance of monopoly forms of capitalism by the core countries. Now, it is a contradiction of the modern capitalist world. This unequal exchange is not only different from the extended reproduction of capital that is characteristic of the core. As a means of extracting surplus, unequal exchange is not only different from the extended reproduction of capital that is characteristic of the core, but is a principal contradiction of the modern capitalist world. World systems theory is a detailed analysis of the process in which capitalism has implanted itself across the globe, its growth and maturation in Europe, and its subsequent expansion abroad. Now, this theory developed as an alternate to the dominant functionalist, diffusionist, evolutionist schools of modernization theories, which largely developed in the United States. The theory is also a political alternative to capitalist growth strategies and the communist opinion. As we have already mentioned, that Immanuel Wallenstein is the person whose name is very much associated with world systems theory. He was the one who brought in semi-periphery zone in the world capitalist economy. For Wallerstein, the global history has been marked by the rise and demise of a series of world systems. Modern world system, as mentioned, emerged in Europe around the turn of the 16th century. Now, the driving force behind this was that of capitalism. According to Wallerstein, world system is a system of production for sale in a market for profit and appropriation of this profit on the basis of individual or collective ownership. Social institutions were created and recreated. It is not only the elements within the system that changed, the system itself was historically bounded. That is, the system had a beginning, it has a middle, and will have an end. In terms of the geography of the modern world system, in addition to core and periphery distinction, the intermediate semi-periphery zone is very important according to Wallerstein. It displays certain features of the core as well as the periphery. Now, we would mention some of the features of core, semi-periphery and periphery countries. The core countries usually have a democratic government. The laborers get high wages. They import raw materials, export manufactured goods. There is good and high investment, and welfare services are there. A periphery usually has a non-democratic government. They export raw materials, import manufactured goods. Laborers get below subsistence wages. There are no welfare services. The semi-periphery usually have authoritarian governments, import raw materials and manufactured goods. Laborers get low wages and there are low welfare services. Now we would mention the characteristics of semi-peripheries in detail. The semi-periphery is a zone which is dominated by the core economic interests. It has its own relatively vibrant, indigenously owned industries. They are not as advanced as the core, but they are ahead than that of the periphery in terms of wealth accumulation. Semi-peripheries have a hybrid nature. They play important roles, and the roles are economic and political roles within the modern political system. They provide the source of labor that counteracts the upward pressure on wages in the core. As the semi-periphery is continuously sending laborers to the core areas, the labor price or the labor wage in the core areas remain stable. It does not rise. Semi-peripheries provide a new home for those industries that can no longer function in the core in a profitable manner. For example, car assembly, textiles. Semi-peripheries play a vital role in stabilizing the political structure of the world system. So now we can understand that world system theory is telling that the world economy is divided into three parts: core, periphery, and semi-periphery in between. All these three zones are linked together in an exploitative relationship in which wealth is drained away from the periphery to the core. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. relative positions of the zones become even more deeply entrenched. Key component of Wallenstein's analysis has been to describe the world systems as having a distinctive lifestyle, a beginning, a middle, and an end. In this sense, capitalist world system is no different from any other system that has preceded it. Controversially, Wallenstein argues that the end of the Cold War is not only marking a triumph of liberalism, but it also indicates that the current system has entered into its end phase, a period of crisis that will end only when it is preceded by another system. Now, we should always understand a period of crisis can also be a period of opportunity. When a system is operating smoothly, behavior is very much determined by the structure. But in times of crisis, actors have greater agency to determine the character of the replacement structure. If we compare the core and the periphery regions, the core region actually has a lot of economic strength. Core represents the owning class, whereas the periphery represents the non-owning class. Core uses its economic strength to accumulate political power. Core is the center in this new world system. Core wants to shape this new world order according to its own interests. The center forces the periphery to accept its dictates. Many a times it is true giving loans to the periphery countries that the core countries influence the political and the economic scenario of the periphery countries. The loans which are given by the developed countries to the developing countries or the underdeveloped countries are usually tied loans. And actually, these tied loans benefit the core countries more than that of the periphery countries. Periphery sometimes succumbs to such dictates of the core. But we should realize that core and periphery are not strictly homogeneous categories. Internal crisis, which is typical in the capitalist economic system, may also affect the core. Western scholars of international relations like Edward Friedman and William Thompson suggested that there could be upward or downward mobility among the core, periphery and semi-periphery countries. A periphery can move upward and become a semi-periphery. A core state may come downward and become a semi-periphery. Supporters of world systems theory never hinted at such possibilities. However, several other scholars state that it is really difficult for the core country to go downward and become semi-periphery because the core countries usually have high level of wealth accumulation and that prevents the core state from moving downward and turning it into a semi-periphery. Christopher Chase Dunn lays much more emphasis on the role of interstate system than world systems theory as provided by Wallenstein. Andre Gunder Frank, one of the most significant dependency theorists, has launched a criticism of Wallenstein's work. He argues that the world system is far older than suggested by Wallenstein. It is an offshoot of a system that originated in Asia. His work has been very much supported by Janet Abu-Lughod. She has challenged Wallenstein's account of the emergence of the modern world system in the 16th century. She argued that during the medieval period, Europe was a peripheral country and the Middle East was the core. This was the condition of the world economy. Andre Gunder Frank supports this. Europe was not the birthplace of current capitalist world economy, but rather the rise of Europe occurred within the context of an existing world system. Neoliberals criticized world system theory as a poor replication of Marxism and its ideas of wealth accumulation and class division. By indicating class division on a regional basis, world systems theory has created further confusion. It is stated by the neoliberals that it is really difficult to assume that the capitalists of a region would share the same class interests with the capitalists with another region. Neo-realists have stated that nationalism is more important in international affairs than the class conflicts based on common economic interests of opposing classes. Neo-realists believe that the causes of conflict in international relations are due to power, aspirations of the countries, and not due to the class consciousness of the people in a region. The neo-realists continue to criticize the economic base of class. Classes may also be formed on the basis of political power or social configuration and not on economic factors in both core and periphery regions. But the proponents of world systems theory have ignored this reality. To them, economic power is the only power which has a direct impact on the creation of core, periphery, and semi-periphery. Wallenstein has argued that capitalism failed to bring about industrial development in periphery countries, but suggested that industrial development did take place in the semi-periphery regions. Now, this view is really unclear. Critics say that if industrial development did not take place in a periphery region, overnight a semi-periphery did not emerge. If this proposition is correct, then it would not be difficult to assume that some wealth accumulation did take place in the periphery region. This facilitated the movement of the country or the zone from the periphery to the semi-periphery. If one recalls core and periphery regions within a periphery as advanced by proponents of world systems theory, then the role of the national capitalists living in the core area within the periphery could not be ignored. Wallenstein's world systems theory has also not given any significance to the cultural aspects of the social system. World systems theory again downplays the local interaction. It looks into the bigger picture of the world as a social system, and it totally downplays the small-scale systems that can actually have an impact on the macro-level processes. Current trading pattern in the world justifies some views of world systems theory. The core countries of the West export more manufactured goods, chemicals and machinery than their imports of these items. Periphery regions of Asia, Africa and Latin America export more agricultural products, minerals, textiles and import more machinery, chemicals and other important technologies from the West. As the manufactured goods, chemicals, technologies are more costly than agricultural and textile products, periphery does not benefit much economically and remains continuously dependent on the core. Now we'll be talking about the dependency theory, and the name very much associated with it is Andre Gunder Frank. Some international relations scholars influenced by Marxism have developed the dependency theory to explain the plight of the third world countries or the periphery countries. Dependency theory states that due to historical reasons, third world remains dependent on external foreign capital. They talk of enclave economy, and national capitalists are responsible for the underdevelopment in the third world region. What do we understand by enclave economy? Dependency theorists have coined the idea of enclave economy, in which foreign capital is invested in the periphery country in order to extract raw materials like minerals, plantations, but the sale of products from these raw materials takes place in foreign lands. As a result, the local enclave or the state does not benefit economically, except they get some jobs for the local population, but its natural resources continue to get depleted in the process. Enclave continues to suffer from lack of development. Some basic assumptions of dependency theory come closer to the world systems theory. Although these two theories are different in the long run, dependency theory has been mostly developed by Latin American scholars like Fernando Henrique Cardoso and Enzo Faleto. Dependency theory puts forward the argument that accumulation of capital in the third world country cannot sustain itself internally. They provided examples of Latin American countries to show that the nation's own capital was not adequate enough for its overall economic development. Today, the developed countries are not having political control over the underdeveloped countries, but they actually deciding or having strong influences on the economic decision making in these underdeveloped countries. In Latin American countries, it has been seen that the nation's own capital was not adequate enough for its overall economic development. A dependent country, even if it accumulates self-sustaining capital, must borrow foreign capital to produce goods, repay debts, and build infrastructure for development. So, it can be said that these third world countries are in a vicious circle, and it is very difficult for them to come out of this vicious circle. Although dependency theorists do not highlight the overall structural pattern of the world advanced by world systems theorists like center and periphery, they focus on the disadvantageous condition of the peripheral countries. The issue of economic development in a peripheral state is dependent on several conditions. internal and external conditions. Internal conditions are the class relationship within a society, country's history, and present political system. The external conditions comprise the presence of foreign capital, multinational corporations, and global economic and political preferences. National governments of peripheral states have very little control over the internal and the external conditions. In fine, we can say that world systems theory and the dependency theories provide a picture which is quite important in international relations. They link colonization by the rich North to the ultimate impoverishment of the South. The core countries continue to dominate the periphery because of its advantageous position in the present international order. The core gets all the blood, the periphery continues to remain anemic. It is very necessary to have a holistic development of the world. One thing we should always understand that poverty anywhere in the world is a threat to prosperity elsewhere. So, world systems theory and dependency theory provides a prism, a way of looking at international relations which was not done before. Though there are several criticisms against these theories, but the truth is they have provided a picture of the international relations which is unique in itself.